The Sinaloa Cartel, an alliance of some of Mexico's top capos, is an international crime organization that is among the most powerful drug trafficking syndicates in the world. The coalition's members operate on connections at the highest levels and corrupting portions of the federal police and military to maintain the upper hand against rivals and keep their trafficking business running. The extent of their influence reaches as far as the US, Argentina, or Colombia, with operations in more than 50 countries but with particular dominance in the United States, with an annual income of up to $39 billion.
In order to solve the meth problem the US had in the mid-2000s, the American government introduced a series of regulations. This was done by limiting medicines that contain chemical precursors to produce meth, such as ephedrine and pseudoephedrine. This was a major factor in the development of the Pacific route. Firstly, China has important pharmaceutical and chemical industries that facilitate the trafficking of this type of precursor chemicals, and the fact that China has the largest domestic consumer market have facilitated the lowering of costs from chemical production. This is due to economies of scale and low production costs, which have made the country the leading global exporter of pharmaceutical ingredients. The shipments resulting from these exports are usually legal. However, the products being shipped, such as APIs and other uncontrolled pharmaceutical outcomes, can be used in the production of drugs and drug precursors. Furthermore, many of these products generated by Chinese chemical and pharmaceutical companies are, in fact, precursor chemicals for meth production. Numbers don't lie, and according to the US Department of State, in 2014, China was the sixth largest exporter of ephedrine and the fifth largest exporter of pseudoephedrine. According to the DEA, nowadays Mexican cartels produce approximately 90% of the meth distributed in the US. However, the precursor chemicals used on this meth aren't from Mexico. 80% of them come from China. To avoid being caught, Chinese traffickers don't ship them chemicals directly to Mexico. Instead, they send them to less regulated Central American ports, where they can be later transported to Mexico. In an effort to avoid this, the Department of State and the DEA provide investigative assistance to foreign governments, especially in Central America, to help develop more effective international drug control laws and regulations. Once the drugs arrive in Mexico, they are in possession of the Sinaloa cartel, who move them to illegal labs to be processed in order to produce methamphetamines, then sent to the US, where it is distributed. Meth prices are stable, but they have a decreasing tendency in the US, as Mexican TCOs, transnational crime organizations, such as the Sinaloa Cartel, are the main producers and distributors of high-purity, low-cost methamphetamine. Indeed, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency's 2018 National Drug Assessment Report confirms the decline of the methamphetamine laboratory seizures across the United States, given that North American consumers have access to a cheaper Mexican meth coming up to the south. However, this has created a competition between the different Mexican TCOs, as most of them are involved in the meth trafficking business due to its high profit profile. To try and have a bigger customer base to avoid excessive competition between them, TCOs are constantly searching for new markets of meth to sell their product.
According to the economic theory of the sociologist Immanuel Wallerstein, we live in a world economy system based on the unequal division of labor and divided by three types of countries: core, periphery, and semi-periphery countries. The first ones are the wealthiest countries, with the most powerful economies. They dominate and exploit the peripheral countries, which are the least developed, exchanging profitable goods or money for cheap labor and raw materials. Moreover, there are semi-peripheral countries that are in a middle position, being also exploited by the core but at the same time enforcing the exploitation of the periphery. In the Pacific route, firstly, we can identify China as the peripheral area, being the main producer of ephedrine and pseudoephedrine since they were banned in Mexico in 2008. China's enormous number of chemical and pharmaceutical companies make it difficult to monitor them all. making it a weakly regulated market that makes it easy for drug traffickers to divert chemicals with legitimate uses to meth production. In consequence, Mexico takes advantage of China's pharmaceutical and chemical industries, encouraging meth precursors chemical flows throughout the Pacific. Moreover, tons of meth are smuggled to the United States, where drugs are illegally exchanged for great quantities of dollars. This money is later sent to China, or laundered through fiscal paradises like the Cayman Islands. In China, the money is used to buy more drug precursors, perpetuating the illegal meth precursors traffic between these two countries. On the other hand, we can consider the illegal drug traffic between Mexico and the United States as another core peripheral economic relation. Indeed, the high consumption of methamphetamine in the United States is what fosters the existence of illegal drug trafficking cartels, such as the Sinaloa Cartel, because they take advantage of a less regulated Mexican policy in illegal drug trafficking. To sum up, in the context of Wallerstein world system theory, we can consider Mexico as a semi-peripheral country, which is taking advantage of China's pharmaceutical industries, but simultaneously, its illegal drug trafficking trade depends on the demand of a more developed country, the United States. Like a multinational company, illegal trade is also driven by the market. While the demand in core regions remains high, the supply from the peripheral countries will keep coming, and the Pacific route of the Sinaloa Cartel will continue existing. In consequence, this methamphetamine trade network also connects the United States directly with China, given that the increasing production of methamphetamine precursors in the Asian country contributed to a decrease in its production in the United States. This also exemplifies how developed countries, the core regions according to the Wallerstein, are able to prevent illegal activities related with drug war, but still consuming drugs, at the expense of the unregulated drug trafficking policy of underdeveloped societies, the semi-peripheral and peripheral countries.
In China, for instance, domestic meth consumption has increased dramatically, from 1 to 13 million people in the last decade, despite all the efforts by Chinese authorities to crack down both producers and users. Drug busts in China in the last few years have also increased, especially in coastal provinces. China's largest mass seizure happened in December 2013, when 3,000 heavily armed police raided Baoshi, a small village located in China's southeast coast. The town had become one of China's major producers, providing over one-third of China's total supply of meth. Therefore, we shall introduce Peter G. Taylor's political economy scale model, which takes into account a vertical vision where individual experience, as well as the economy of both the nation-state and the world organization, shape the way in which every one of us looks and interprets reality. Thus, we can differentiate three main levels: the reality, where the world economy and organization remains the base for all the human activities; the ideology, fostered by the nation-state and its own social, political, and economical situation; and the experience, where the everyday life single-handedly builds our own perspective of the world. Applying this model to the Pacific route countries, the worldwide scale of reality is fostered in a capitalist-based world trade, and it's mostly stimulated by an interstate market where illegal drug trade takes place. In China, the national level scale can be viewed through a diversibility of Chinese mode of thinking, clearly reflected in the way the people of Baoshi had adapted their economy activity to work in a highly profitable good that allowed them not to depend on an activity as frivolous as fishing. If, finally, we take a closer look at the local reality, the conclusion is most definitely alarming. Nearly 20% of the villagers living in Baoshi had been involved in one way or another in drug trafficking. Drug trade allowed them to earn as much as 10 times more through meth production than they could have as a standard fishing workers. In the case of Mexico, just like in China, drug use has increased notably. However, what stands out the most in Mexico is the extreme violence in their everyday life. It is estimated that 1 out of 10 homicides are directly involved with Mexican cartels and their drug wars. Take, for instance, the Battle of Culiacan in October 2019. The shooting for the capture and arrest of one of their leaders mobilized both the National Mexican Army and the military of the Sinaloa Cartel. The clash ended up with 17 deaths and a panic state for all the population in the city. Only 3 days later, the Sinaloa Cartel mobilized over 700 men and used heavy arms to gather over 200 hostages, which were released once the Mexican president handed over the narco leader. At a national level, Mexicans are profoundly affected by the cartel culture and turf wars having been held all over the country for decades, as well as influenced by the systematic corruption of government organisms. This cultural trait, based on the domination of gangs and cartels, shapes not only the national economy, but also the people within. The local scale is largely influenced by personal experiences. However, there's a large part of the population that has been, directly or indirectly, a victim of the cartel's violence. Take, for instance, one of the 200 hostages in the aftermath of the Battle of Culiacan. Finally, in the US, meth use increased steadily over the 90s and early 2000s. Even though it can't be said North American lifestyles have been affected in the same way as Chinese and Mexican have, the extensive and uncontrollable use of meth in the US about 10 years ago led to the so-called methamphetamine epidemic. The national level in the USA is highly influenced by their cultural history and economy. Drug use is highly controlled, and although a remarkable part of the population consume it, it is not socially accepted. On a local level, the experience is seldom defined by the drug use. Marginal and poorer groups do receive a higher negative impact on drugs use, which is more widespread. But given that it's a first world country, US residents are not directly exposed to drug wars and have protection mechanisms, such as the Synthetic Drug Abuse Prevention Act or the International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs Bureau, which act at a national level.
In conclusion, the Mexican Sinaloa cartel has become a powerful drug trafficking organization, having in its possession a huge transnational market of illicit drugs. It has been able to go beyond national boundaries and establish a set of illegal trade networks between different countries over the world through routes like the called Pacific Route, that links Asian meth precursors with the Mexican drug labs and Western consumers, especially those from the United States, the principal customer of Sinaloa cartel. Thus, the increasing expansion of global trade and the advantages of an improved connected world has also enhanced a set of illegal activities with a negative impact on population, especially for the peripheral countries, as explained on the two models previously mentioned.